Okay. Okay, we left off last time talking about the New England colonies. Okay, and I told you guys that the centerpiece of the New England colonies is Massachusetts. So if you watch Monday's lecture, you know that Monday I talked a little bit about how the difference between Puritans and Separatists. That the Separatists are the first to arrive. They are Pilgrims, and the Pilgrims will found Plymouth in 1620. That's the Mayflower. Okay, but the Plymouth colony is always very small. The Bay Colony, on the other hand, is founded by Puritans. Okay, Puritans are different than Separatists. They have not left the Church of England. They are being discriminated against back home in England and by the Church of England, and that's why so many of them end up coming here. But they are, in essence, okay, very different. They are still members of the Church of England, but they come here and they are going to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they are going to develop a colony there that will use Boston as its hub. Okay, so in the 1630s, really starting in 1630 is when you begin to see the great migration of Puritans that will come to America and will settle in Massachusetts. Okay? Remember that the Puritans get their name because they want to purify the Church of England, not leave it. The Pilgrims had already left. Okay? They're very different from one another. So the Bay Colony is always going to be more populous, more prosperous. Okay, there's going to be more people, there's going to be more economic activity. Okay, and because of the people that end up coming to Massachusetts and settling in Massachusetts and coming in waves, they are going to have to adapt to a different environment. And I told you guys one of the things to be looking for in our discussion of the colonies is how these colonies are different from one another and how they're the same. Okay. In the South, which we talked about earlier, and we will continue to talk about a little bit later on, those southern colonies are agricultural. New England will not be, the soil will not support large scale agriculture. So you're never going to see it like you see it in the South. And so, because they are not spread out, because they are not rural, because they are not out tending huge sections of land, and because there's so many of them, they settled in towns. They will settle close together. They will organize themselves into towns, into settlements. And that cooperative settlement actually ends up bettering their life expectancy, bettering their ability to to heal themselves from illness. Okay, child mortality and infant mortality is lower. You live longer, and so therefore, when you kind of think about that, you've got more people coming into the Bay Colony. When they get here, they live longer and better. Okay, and so the secret to that is settling in the town. Okay? The early leadership of the Bay Colony is also important. The first governor of Massachusetts is this guy, John Winthrop, okay, who was a well-off attorney. He was technically a lord from England, well-educated, comes here to America, okay, and becomes Massachusetts' first governor. Winthrop's book, Model of Christian Charity, talks about Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, being a model for others to emulate. Okay. He really believed that the Bay Colony, his famous line is, "We shall be as a city on a hill." Okay. A beacon for everyone to look at, to model themselves after, okay? And everyone will be looking at us, okay? Winthrop believed that he had a calling from God to be there. Many other people that follow along with him and many of the Puritans that come to America and end up settling in the Bay Colony feel that they have a calling from God to come here. And so religion, it becomes a big deal for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay. And religion, you got to think about this. Okay. Religion, freedom of religion is what brought them here because they were being discriminated against back home in England. So freedom of religion makes them come here. When they get here, they really want to establish a colony that is a model of their faith, a model of their religion. Okay, so you would think that a group of people that were coming here because they were being discriminated against back home would believe that religious toleration was important. But when they get here, they establish a colony in Massachusetts where religious toleration doesn't really exist. Massachusetts, unfortunately, is going to become a very religiously, almost intolerant colony, as we'll see later on. Okay. Now, remember I told you the model that the Puritans set, and really everyone in the Bay follows, is this idea of settling in a town. Okay. And so this is just a plan of one of the towns that you would find in the Bay. Okay. And if you guys look up here, you guys can see that all of these really yellow areas are houses. They're houses, it's where people lived, and it's their yard, their plot. Okay. So if they're settling that close together, where do they do their farming? And you look out here to the outskirts and you see that this is the farmland. Okay. Remember, they aren't planting big export crops. They are planting enough to do what? To feed themselves. Okay. So you don't need a huge amount of land to do that, but you do need enough. And so each of these plots really belonged to one of the families. And it was where really the agricultural work was done. Okay. Right here, kind of in this area that you see right here in the middle, is the meeting house. Okay. So the meeting house would be for several purposes. Okay. Town meetings, okay, assemblies, okay. But you would also have areas where the meeting house also served as the town's church. Okay. So it was like a civic center, church, and in some cases, the place where the town's government would meet as well. Very quickly, one person in each town began to emerge as one of the most important people in the town. Who is it? The minister. In Puritans are Congregationalists. Okay, Puritans are Congregationalists. That means that the congregation of the church, the members of the church, choose their minister. Okay, not appointed by a bishop. Okay, not it's hired essentially by the congregation. And so that minister becomes really a vital and very powerful person in the town. All right, here's the thing. Okay, the minister could not run for public office. So the minister is never going to be the mayor. The minister is never going to be a town council member. Okay. But because church membership was the only way that you could participate in politics, that means that every member of the town's government is a member of the church, and you are the minister. So even though they don't officially have a place in the government, they can be extremely influential. Okay. Now, some scholars will argue that because of the influence of the church in voting, because of the influence of the church in politics, because of the influence of the minister over the political system, that you are on the border of what's called a theocracy, okay, where government is run by a church, a god, priests, whatever, okay, that you're on the border of that. Church membership, what I told you about earlier, okay, is really difficult to attain. The New England way and Puritan ways and Congregationalist ways really required you to go and present yourself before the church, talk about your sins, talk about your religious experience, okay? And it was a very difficult process to go through. So you essentially had to apply for church membership, okay, give a speech about why you deserve church membership, and then the church members had to agree to allow you in. If they did, you were in. If they didn't, well, you might as well move to another town, okay, because you are locked out of the governance of the town that you're in. So the church, very crucial to the town life. And I told you guys that town life also led to really some interesting statistics, okay? Mortality rate is lower. Life expectancy is 70. I mean, geez, it's not much better than that today, right? What was life expectancy in Jamestown when I first told you guys about Jamestown? About 40. Okay. So people in New England tended to live longer. They have more children because infant mortality rate is lower. And because you have more of an opportunity, because you're living longer, to have more children. Okay. Average age at marriage, women usually married sometime around 22. Okay. And men sometime around 27. So these statistics produced towns and a settlement and a colony that was almost, when you kind of think about it, when you add immigration into it, was perpetually growing, continually getting bigger, unlike some of the other places we've seen. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this probably on our lecture on Friday, where I'll talk about a little bit about colonial society. But in Massachusetts and in New England especially, there was a very male-driven society. It was a patriarchy, okay? Patria in Latin is father, okay? So it's a very male-driven society, okay? And when you think about it, you have male ministers, you have males only voting, okay? You have males running households, okay? So that should tell you that these areas are very male driven. And Massachusetts society was very much male driven. Women were on the fringe in a lot of areas. They couldn't really meet to discuss religion. They had to take kind of a side light in a lot of these things. Okay. All right. because of the strictness of the Bay Colony, because of the difficulties many of the people that had different beliefs, or maybe a little bit of a different belief, say, than your minister might have, found in Massachusetts, you're going to have some problems. And these problems emerge pretty early on. One of my favorite problems that emerges centers around this guy, Roger Williams. Roger Williams was an extremely charismatic and very popular minister in nearby Salem. Yes, famous for the witch trials later on. But Roger Williams was cut from a little bit of a different cloth. Okay? He had some different ideas. Some might say some radically different ideas than maybe his Puritan brethren did. Okay? So if you have this very narrow idea of what Puritanism is, okay, Roger Williams's idea is much broader. Okay? And that is going to get him in trouble. Okay? For example, look at the first thing. I told you guys that, I already told you that the Puritans did not break away from the Church of England. Okay? That's what the Pilgrims had done. What's Roger Williams advocating for? Breaking away. So in his church, he's talking to his congregation about things like, hey, we're having to go again, or we're having to do things because the Church of England says we have to do them, that we may not think is right. And if that's the truth, then why don't we just break away? That does not go over very well with the Massachusetts colonial leadership. Okay? Now, each town is going to have its own leaders. Okay? But Massachusetts, as a colony, the Bay Colony, is eventually going to get its own assembly and have a governor. Okay? And those guys have to kind of toe the line. And then you got Roger Williams out there saying, hey, let's just break away from the church. That would destroy the Massachusetts Bay Charter, which says that they have to be affiliated with the Church of England. Okay? We can't do that. Speaking of charter, Roger Williams says, look, if you want to talk about the charter, let's talk about the charter. The charter is terrible. One of the worst things you guys did is you took land away from the Native Americans and you didn't compensate them for it. There's this whole thing, you remember in the Ten Commandments about thou shalt not steal. Okay? So we just blitzkrieged our way in here, took all the land away from the Native Americans, pushed them out of the way, and you guys didn't even compensate them for it. That's not very Christian. So he advocated going back and giving the Native Americans that got dispossessed some compensation. That's not very popular. Okay? He wanders into some really dark ground here. We here in America are used to the Bill of Rights that says that the first of the Bill of Rights, where you talk about freedom of speech, freedom of press, it also talks about freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Okay? Basically what it says is you can't be prosecuted, you can't be discriminated against because of what religious beliefs you have. But the First Amendment also says that Congress and the government cannot force all of us to be one particular religion. There can be no law established that would create a unanimous religion. Okay. All right. Freedom of, freedom from. Okay. Well, Roger Williams looks at what Massachusetts Bay is doing and is concerned. For example, there is a law in the Bay Colony that requires you to go to church. So by not going to church, you are essentially breaking the law. Why does Roger Williams not like that? You got to think about it. As a church minister, you would probably think, hey, he would like that, right? Doesn't. Why? Roger Williams is smarter than you people. Okay, why doesn't he like it? No. There's two things that are going on here. If you force people to go to church, you're going to have a group there that what? Doesn't want to be there. And that group that doesn't want to be there is corrupting. Okay? They don't want to be here. They are going to be a drag on all of us that do want to be here. So if you force them to come, you're just making all of our lives worse. Two, if government can tell you that you have to go to church, that's a theocracy, right? And that's a dangerous game to play. Because all of a sudden, then maybe the government can come in and say, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. And they're meddling in church affairs. If you are a church, you don't want the government telling you what you can do inside your own building. And you're letting their nose in the tent by allowing them to tell us that we ought to go to church on Sunday. More complicated than you might have thought. Well, Roger Williams makes enough and raises enough hell that he gets brought up on charges in 1635. The Massachusetts Assembly, the governors, they've had enough of him, and they accuse him of preaching, quote unquote, new and dangerous opinions, find him guilty essentially of being a heretic, okay? And they kick him out. They banish him from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, it's close to winter. They actually let him stay until the next year so he doesn't have to go out on his own in the winter, okay? How nice of them. But Roger Williams decides in 1636, when the weather gets better, that he will leave and push south. And a little bit further south, out of the Bay Colony's really reach, he finds an area that looks like it is a pretty good place to settle. So he will establish a settlement at what today becomes Providence, Rhode Island. And the Rhode Island colony is underway. So remember me telling you that the others are offshoots of Massachusetts? So here's an example. Massachusetts kicks Roger Sherman out. He and some of his followers leave Massachusetts, push south, establish Providence, and the Rhode Island colony begins. Okay. Now up there, some of the Bay Puritans wanted to send him back to England rather than just exile him, because this is what they were afraid of, that he would just go somewhere else and establish a new settlement. And that's exactly what he does. Sherman, because of his experiences, you can probably guess what happens next, okay? The Rhode Island colony becomes a model of religious toleration. Rhode Island does not care if you are Puritan, if you are Pilgrim, if you are anything. Okay? Rhode Island becomes the most religiously tolerant of the colonies, mainly because of what Roger Williams had to go through. Because of its religious toleration, it also becomes remarkably politically free. If you were male, you could vote in the beginning. But later, the English, when Rhode Island really becomes a colony and gets a charter, the English required you to have property qualifications for voting. And so universal manhood suffrage will eventually have to transform itself into property qualifications. Okay. There were no special privileges, freedom of opportunity. Okay. And because of its religious toleration and because of its political freedom, the Bay tends to call it the sewer, a dumping ground for unbelievers, dissenters, troublemakers. Okay. Anybody that doesn't fit in, anybody with radical beliefs, they can go to Rhode Island and live in the sewer. Okay. If you had the choice, okay, you go to the Bay Colony and you have to abide by the Bay rules, or you settle somewhere, especially if you are someone of a different faith or a different kind of set of beliefs, you can settle in Rhode Island. Okay. Now, Roger Williams isn't the only one. Okay. Anne Hutchinson might be maybe the most famous. I doubt it. Roger Williams is pretty big. But Anne Hutchinson's another one. One thing you ought to notice pretty quickly here is that Anne is a woman. Okay. In a very male-dominated society, in a very male-dominated patriarchy, Anne Hutchinson emerges. She is very well educated, which she had to do herself. She is remarkably insightful about the scriptures. She began to host a meeting at her home for her minister and for other people that she kind of liked. Okay. And they would meet and discuss the day's sermon and discuss religious matters. Okay. Well, what are women in Massachusetts not supposed to be doing? Mixing with men and talking about religion. Okay. Well, you can probably guess that's going to get her in trouble. Okay. She is, because of her intelligence, her strong will, she's very well spoken too. She threatens that Massachusetts patriarchy. Okay. And so she, for example, you take some of her beliefs, okay, antinomianism, okay, which is impossible to say, it's even harder to spell. But she carried predestination out, okay, talked a little bit about predestination, and she talked about some of the things I told you earlier on. We talked about predestination. Living a holy life, living a good life, having a religious experience was no real sign, or could not be, or maybe is not a true sign of salvation. We don't know if we are one of the elect. Okay? But she was confident that she was, and she was confident that her minister was, because she judged them based on her beliefs and her interpretation of Scripture. And if I'm in a group of people, surrounding myself with a group of people that I believe to be truly saved, okay? There's no riffraff here, okay? We believe that we are truly saved, okay? Do we have to listen to people who we consider to be unsaved? What if the governor tells me that I can't do that? And I just look at him and I say, I don't have to obey you because you aren't one of the elect. I am. God tells me what? I don't have to listen to you. Uh-oh. Okay. So not only is she threatening the patriarchy and the social order, she's also threatening in some ways the political order because she's giving you an excuse not to obey on religious grounds. All right. Give you an example, okay, of what I'm talking about here, which is complicated. Before you guys ever got here, the academic dean, several years back, he's retired now, he came here from Louisiana College, which was a very deeply religious college in Louisiana, obviously. And shortly before he left, they were having a bitter fight in the administration and in the faculty about spending money. Some wanted to build, some new classroom buildings, okay, and expand the campus. Others felt like that was not a good idea and that they should save the money for a rainy day, okay, in case things got bad. And so tensions were very high. And they had an assembly, and one person rose passionately to speak for building the building, okay? And at the end of their speech, he told us, that person said, I prayed about this all night, and God told me that we should build these buildings. So all of this person's supporters rise and give him a standing ovation. Yay, okay. The next person gets up to speak, of course, who is going to advocate for saving the money, walks up, plops his speech up on the podium and says, that's awful funny. I prayed all night last night, and God told me that we should be saving this money. So, of course, all of his supporters jump up. Woo! Okay, now which one was right? I don't know. Okay. How can you argue with her line of thinking here? Okay. And that is dangerous. You can probably guess what happens to Anne. Like Roger, she gets put on trial. And because she is so sharp-witted and because she is such a good speaker, she hammers the Puritan leaders for days in her trial. Okay. Now, she finally breaks by bragging that she had received her beliefs directly from God, and that does not necessarily fit in with Puritan spiritual beliefs. They decide to banish her. So she goes to Rhode Island and then later to New York, right on the border of New York. So Anne Hutchinson gets booted out of Massachusetts, and her and her family end up getting killed a few years later in a Native American attack. Okay, a group of Indians in that area will attack her family, and they're all killed. To which John Winthrop said that this was obviously an act of God, that this was God showing us who was right. Okay, ouch. Okay, all right. to rebels, though. Okay, and that's important to understand that the Bay Colony has this idea that it is a city on the hill. It's this example, right? But it's an example that is very tight. You have to follow, you have to do what they tell you to. And those that kind of break away, they end up getting booted out. So now you can see how these offshoots start to take shape. Okay. Rhode Island is right there. Roger Williams. You have several ministers break away from the Massachusetts Bay. They will move over and establish Hartford and then New Haven. And later that will come together and become, really, Connecticut. Okay. So this will become the Connecticut colony. And then you will have some that will break away and push north and become New Hampshire. Okay. So these are the offshoots. All right. Because it always happens, okay, on the test, there will be a map of the 13 colonies. And by God, you're going to have to label it. And it never fails that somebody wants to count Maine as one of the original 13 colonies. Okay? It is not. Maine will belong to Massachusetts until the Revolutionary War. Okay? Even after. When you see Maine up there, you should scratch through in your mind for a while and say Massachusetts. Okay? Because Maine belongs to Massachusetts. And it is not one of the 13 original colonies, and neither is Vermont. Okay? So, remind yourself of that. Okay? So, when we get to about 1650, this is sort of what we're talking about. Okay? Connecticut here, Rhode Island here. Plymouth is still independent in 1650. The Bay Colony is here. Okay? And New Hampshire is up there. And of course, notice what that says, Maine, part of Massachusetts. Okay. So this is the New England area. Okay. Now, like we did with the South, I want to kind of remind you about the characteristics of this whole region. Okay. No large scale, big time agriculture. Okay. It's not going to happen. They're going to produce enough food to survive, but not to export. Okay. But speaking of export, they're going to find plenty of things to export. Furs, lumber. This area becomes a massive shipping area. Why? What? It's on the coast and has good harbors. Boston Harbor, excellent. Okay. Portsmouth up there, okay. So Boston, even Plymouth to some extent, okay. Newport right here, okay. So you can get the idea. So this area is going to become pretty important in the mercantilism idea, the mercantilism trade, okay. And it's going to be much more probably, when you kind of think about it, they're much tighter. They are much more economically driven, much more trading and shipping driven than, of course, their relatives to the South. How many African slaves are going to be in New England? A few, but not very many. All 13 colonies had slaves at one time or another, but not many in New England. Why? Where does slavery have to exist? Where is slavery needed? In the South for agriculture, right? You don't need it here, okay? And so it's never going to take off and become a necessity to the economics like it does in the South, okay? So you have lots of differences here between these two areas, okay? All right, we'll stop here for today, okay? Friday, we're going to talk about, Friday's lecture is going to be pretty quick, okay? Well, the colonial part of it's going to be pretty quick. I've still got to talk about the middle colonies, okay? I got to talk about some of the southern colonies, okay? And then we'll talk about a little bit about colonial life, okay? And so next week is the short week, okay, because of the Labor Day holiday. We'll start to get towards the beginnings of the American Revolution, and probably early that next week, okay, we're going to take our first test, okay? So I am going to put up the study guide this week, okay? I'll have the study guide up before the lecture on Friday, okay? So you guys need to start looking for that. Also, okay, I told the other class on Monday, some of you heard it, you did, that I was telling them that there was a chance that social distancing would end and that we would all come back together and start going back to school, all right, as a whole class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We have not. Okay, we will not. That will be reevaluated for the next time on October 1st. So for the next month, we're carrying on just like we have been. Okay, so for September, we will still be on our, you guys come on Wednesday. We all are virtual on Friday, and the other group comes on Monday. Okay, and that will continue until October 1st. Okay. The other thing is that I went in and did attendance today, and some of you did not do your attendance markers for Friday. Okay, so you may have an absence that shows up when you get your attendance report this weekend. So if you're not doing those attendance markers, okay, then you're going to get counted absent. You guys should be watching the Monday lecture and doing that one, and the Friday lecture. Okay. So if you're not doing those, you're getting counted absent because you have to do those to show that you are here and active in the class, okay? So make sure that you're doing that, okay? And that you're doing your homework. All right, get out of here. I'll see you guys, okay? Remember, okay, Friday, we will do our normal lecture thing, okay? Monday is a holiday, so I won't see the Monday group. So next week's lectures are going to be a little bit longer, okay? Because I'm going to cram basically 3 lectures into 2, okay? So next week's will be a little bit longer, okay? So be prepared for that. All right, see you guys.